Okay, welcome busy gamers. Today we're going to be talking about Vampire Survivors. What's good about the game, what's bad about the game, and, of course, that all-important question, is it worth your time? So, before we move on, if you're enjoying this content, you want to see more from me, please go ahead and like this video, and ideally subscribe to the channel if you're interested. It's going to go a long way in helping me develop and improve. Also, I've broken this video down into chapters for your convenience, so if you've joined me for another worth your time video in the past, feel free to skip to the section that's most relevant to you or that you're most interested in. So let's move on to the game overview. This is currently on PC and Xbox, and it comes from an indie developer called Poncle. And while I'm going to treat this as a full game, as I fully believe that it deserves, its humble origins were that of a free browser game the creator used to practice his development skills. Now, in the game, the players are thrown into the role of a survivor, unequipped and alone in the night, merely attempting to survive, as waves upon waves of monsters swarm them again and again in progressively more difficult forms. Overall, the gameplay follows a minimalist style with only the movement truly in full control of the player, and it's essentially what I would call a bullet hell style arcade game that has some roguelike elements and a wide variety of unlockables. So on to the review. At this time, I've played Vampire Survivors for around 13 or 14 hours on PC, and I've unlocked around 75% of the achievements and the unlocks that are available, giving me what I believe is a pretty solid and relatively complete picture of everything the game has to offer. The majority of the unlocks I still have left are things like just surviving 30 minutes with specific characters. There are a lot of characters in this particular game, and so I have not played every character in every level and things of that nature. It takes time, it's worth doing, and is something that I will likely continue. So what's good about Vampire Survivors? The unlocks and the progression are just excellent. The game starts very, very difficult and requires a fair amount of gold to be boosting your character's strength via post-game or rather post-run roguelike elements. Now, you acquire gold through opening different chests and things on the game. You also acquire it by moving around the map and destroying certain things that will drop gold. Now, these permanent or power-related unlocks are not it, though. Throughout the process, you're going to be earning achievements and completing hidden objectives that are going to be unlocking even more content. So virtually every achievement has a content unlock with it. So these content unlocks will include things like new bonus levels, new characters with special weapons that you haven't seen before, and that interact with the world in a different way. Also, the ability to combine weapons via unions or relic type upgrades, which we can go into in a little bit more detail later. The new characters are pretty plentiful, and for the most part they do seem to manage to be fairly unique, with their weapons certainly doing so and standing out between each other. Now, I found chasing the weapons' many relic forms and their union versions to be one of the most constant and fun goals I had within any individual run, both for the achievements that they give you the first time you do, and honestly just for their raw power. Now, I would say weapon design is also great, and it's worth calling out on its own, not just kind of rolling into the point that I just made. Because each weapon behaves so very, very differently than the rest of them. They're on unique cooldowns, and so they'll strike at different intervals. They have different patterns in which they strike, which becomes very, very relevant. You don't want a lot of weapons that strike just side to side, for example. And they also have different direction of fire. So some of them you can control based on the way you're going, and some of them will fire at the furthest monster or the closest monster or at random, for example. Because of these different factors, creating a complementary loadout of the 6 weapons you're going to be limited to during a run is very important. It creates a fair amount of strategic choice in that portion of the game. Now, you're allowed to choose a new weapon or something of that nature, meaning a weapon or a power-up every time you level up. This is especially true for us when you're not going to see as many options early on in the game, because before you've bought some of those roguelike elements, you only see 3 options. You're not able to banish them or re-roll them. And so the specific builds you might be looking for, the loadouts you might be looking for, may not always be accessible to you, which is where you have to make some strategic choices. In addition, because the relic versions of weapons are going to require some specific combinations with your support items, the choice becomes even more important here. Having at least one of these weapons, in my opinion, is crucial and almost mandatory to winning a run. If I'm being honest, I don't really know how many times or if ever that I've really won a run without at least having one weapon being altered into its relic form. So let's move into the bad for the game. What are some downsides for Vampire Survivors? As much as I enjoyed the weapons and how varied they were, I will admit that part of me never really got over how little control I felt I had within the game. You don't aim or control your weapons in any meaningful way, and early on you move so very slowly to the point that dodging, while somewhat possible, really feels more like constantly running versus actively making any impressive plays. That is also somewhat due to the fact that the mob types, while unique in look, are typically not that different in behavior. Almost every enemy runs straight at you at some variation of some speed, and will just move directly in whatever direction is the closest path to you. The game also kind of feels like what I'm going to call a tipping point is reached here. So you're going to be going through any given run, and you're going to hit the tipping point. Usually for me, this comes at around the 15 to 20 minute mark into a run, sometimes a bit later, but usually around 15 to 20 minutes in. If you've played well up to that point, you essentially just know you're going to win the run. You can just move around the map with complete and utter immunity, as the monsters around you just turn into a constant feed of gems for you. And I will admit, it is fun to feel all-powerful, so to speak, but I find it often happens earlier than I'd like, which leaves me with the remaining minutes of the game, of which each run is a maximum of 30 minutes, but that is completing the run, makes it feel lackluster. To add on to kind of what I just said there, the end game of any run is also a bit bad in my perspective, which is essentially the last 3 to 5 minutes of a run. This is where the game essentially becomes an entire screen full of enemies. You can technically run to one side and get a little clear of this, just having this gaggle of enemies or horde of enemies following you. But if you can survive that initial wave that just kind of completely fills the screen, you can usually basically just AFK for the rest of the game. Honestly, for me, this takes away the fun. It ultimately feels like you're just wasting time at the end of a game. Yes, you still level up, but at this point you probably have all of your items and your weapons completely maxed, so you only generate about 25 gold per level. You're allowed to select generating 25 gold every time you level, or a floor chicken, which is healing. But again, at this stage, if you're going to be taking damage, you're going to be dying, in my opinion. There's not many cases in which all of a sudden you're taking damage and then you survive, because typically you're taking damage because you can't hold back the horde. So that's the good, that's the bad. Let's move on to what we consider the ephemeral efficiencies and as kind of our channel focus. How does Vampire Survivors treat your time? On one hand, this is a simple arcade game that is quick to pick up, easy to put down, but ultimately once you've played a few times, each and every run you make is likely to take the 30 minutes, and while you can technically pause it, there's no way to pause, save, and then return to that point of a run later. At least all of the gold you gain up to that point in a run is going to advance your game, but gold will become largely unnecessary within the first 10 or so hours of play. I remember having all of the upgrades several runs ago, and like I said, I've played around 13 or 14 hours. So on to the final scores for this. The overall final score here is an 8. I honestly very much enjoyed this game. It may not look shiny from the outside, but it's engaging and fun with a lot of heart. It kept pulling me in even when part of my opinions or part of me always felt like it had no right to do so. I feel like that's an odd but a strong complaint. Compliment, not complaint there. It sounds like a complaint, and it is an odd way to make a compliment. But even when I was like, oh, this shouldn't be making me want to play more, I was like, oh, just one more game, just one more run, just one more pickup. So that is a strong compliment for me. Now, our ephemeral efficiency score here is going to be a 7. It's 30 minutes, so that's short enough that I don't feel the need to bring it down too far, as it can fit into almost anyone's busy schedule, but it's not perfect with games lasting 30 minutes by design, and much of the tail end of each run feeling easy or lacking engagement of some kind. So that's my opinion of this game. If you like the content, if you liked what I said, or if you disagree with me, feel free to leave some support or some disagreement below in the comments here. I'm going to make sure I engage with everybody that engages with me. So enjoy your gaming time, and I'll see you on the next one.